So where do innovations come from? Well, it's a good question to ask, and it might prompt this kind of picture. There he is, Archimedes lying in his bath, trying to solve a problem. And suddenly it comes to him. Eureka! I have it! And he gets out of his bath and runs naked down the street to tell the world. No, that's not really how innovation happens. Very occasionally it might start with a flash of inspiration, but most times innovation comes from other directions. So let's ask our question again. Where do innovations come from? Well, the reality is they come from all sorts of directions. Maybe it's working in a research lab, what we call knowledge push, creating new knowledge which creates new possibilities. Maybe it's listening to the voice of the customer, letting the market pull the innovation through. Maybe the government tells us what we can or can't do, and that shapes the kind of innovation we work with. Maybe we see somebody else and think we can copy that, and we imitate what they're doing. Maybe there's something that works in a completely different sector. It already is proven stuff there. We can bring that into a new sector and innovate from that direction. Maybe we can dream about the future, science fiction, and see new possibilities there. In fact, innovation comes at us from everywhere. Stop! Now let's pause and rewind once again. Where do innovations come from? The reality is that innovations come from multiple sources. And so what we really need to do is to be sure we're looking and we're searching in all of those different directions to pick up the trigger signals. Now, to help us, we might usefully classify those very different sources of innovation into two groups. On the one hand, there are those we can loosely call knowledge push. They create possibilities, innovation opportunities through applying new knowledge. And the other class are what we could loosely call need pull. These are opportunities that come in response to particular needs. Let's take a closer look at both of those. So let's look first at the idea of knowledge push. And as I say, what we're looking at here is new knowledge creating new possibilities. It underlies the whole field of what we call research and development. And let's be clear, that's a very big field. Basically, around the world today, in the public and private sector, we spend $1,600 billion every year in public and private sector research and development around the world. Now that's a huge number, and it's not just in the world of manufacturing. When we think about research, very often we think of people in white coats in laboratories doing that kind of stuff. And of course, that's very important. But the service sector does a huge amount of R&D. It may be a little better hidden, but it still goes on. Think about all the software that underpins things like Amazon's operations in retailing, or think about the design efforts that involve a great deal of psychological research in terms of understanding how you might lay out a supermarket, or how you might build a hotel. So basically, there's a huge amount of research and development, all of which creates possibilities, knowledge push. So let's look at some examples of knowledge push innovation. This is a good place to start. This is a photograph of Bell Labs, Bell Laboratories. And there's a clue in that name. This was the facility originally established by Alexander Bell when he was growing his telephone company. And of course, the first research was around making the telephone more effectively, but it moved to many other fields of communication technology and the underlying science. And many innovations that we have today, not least those which drive the computer industry, have their roots in work done at Bell Labs. It was the place where the transistor was invented, and the transistor in the 1950s essentially paved the way for the integrated circuits and the building blocks of today's computer architecture. Bell Labs has thousands of patents and continues to play an important role in driving the innovation agenda. But it wasn't just Alexander Bell. Many organizations in the 20th century began to realize the advantage of putting together resources in a focused fashion to create knowledge. For example, Philips, originally a light bulb maker moving quickly into electronics, established in Europe its own large research laboratory. Much of the global chemical industry is built on the science that came from the big chemical manufacturers at the turn of the 20th century, investing in R&D. Another area where this is very, very relevant is pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceutical companies essentially make a great deal of money from blockbuster drugs. Drugs which have huge impact in terms of improving health, but which are also quite profitable. But this doesn't come about by accident. The pharmaceutical industry typically spends up to 20% of its turnover returned to create new knowledge by funding R&D. Now, of course, we need to remember in talking about knowledge push innovation that it's distributed along a spectrum. Remember, we've been talking throughout about innovation being along a spectrum of possibilities, changing things perhaps by doing them a little bit better, incremental improvements, right the way along to radical changes, perhaps something the world has never seen before, doing something completely different. At the one end, we have essentially an exploiting approach. We're exploiting our knowledge base, incrementally moving it forward. Further across the spectrum, we're talking about radical change, and essentially we're in the realms of exploring. But anywhere along that spectrum allows us to make use of our knowledge base. In the pharmaceutical industries, blockbuster drugs are often built on radically new ideas, perhaps a breakthrough in terms of our understanding about genetics or about bodily function. But equally, minor improvements in metallurgy or in battery technology will still have an impact. They're both examples distributed right across the spectrum of knowledge push innovation. So we can see from these and many other examples just how important a source of innovation knowledge push can be. But surely there are also limits to knowledge push innovation, aren't there? Yes, you're absolutely right. In fact, in many ways, the biggest challenge to knowledge push innovation is what we might call the better mousetrap problem. Now, there's a very famous quotation, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the American writer. He said, "Build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door." But of course it doesn't. Despite all sorts of innovation, we've not really had that much change in the basic design for mousetraps. Most of them are still the same spring-loaded device we've had for a very long time. Lots of people think, knowledge push, they can come up with a better mousetrap, but the reality is that very often the market doesn't want it. And that's the problem with knowledge push innovation. It absolutely creates new possibilities, but does it create value? And value is something that is experienced by the user. So we probably now need to turn our attention about sources of innovation to looking at the user side in all of this. So let's turn our attention to the other side of the innovation story, demand pull or need pull as a source of innovation. Now, this is perhaps best captured in that famous phrase, necessity is the mother of invention. This idea that somehow a need, a problem will pull an innovation, pull a solution through. And we can see this all around us. This is a simple example. This gentleman is riding his motorbike and wants to take passengers. Passengers plural. On the back, he's got room for one person to sit behind him, but what he wants, his need, is to carry more than one extra person, and so he comes up with this innovation. It's a silly example, but it's essentially what need-pull innovation is all about. Now, it's important in this very powerful class of innovation sources to recognize it's not just market needs in the commercial sense that we're talking about. Of course, that's hugely important, especially in consumer-facing industries. But we could also talk about innovation needs in terms of social needs. We've seen many examples of this already. Social needs, changing the world in some way for a better solution to its problems, that's another class, or another contributor to the class of need-pull innovations. And we should also remember that it's not just about products and services, but also the processes which create them. Inside a factory, for example, the machine that's not working as efficiently as it could, the machine that's producing quality that could be a little improved, the squeaking wheel we often hear about. These are all examples of incremental needs, but needs nonetheless which provide triggers for process innovation. And we also need to remember that innovation is distributed, need-pull innovation is distributed along our same innovation spectrum. From doing what we do better, incremental innovation, exploit innovation, right the way through to radical, do different innovation, exploring new possibilities. Again, right along this spectrum, there are opportunities to pick up signals about need-pull innovation. So once again, let's look at some examples of need-pull innovation. Well, let's begin with the world of retailing and an organization we've already come across, Zara, the big fashion retailer. Now, Zara is hugely in the business of trying to understand user needs and very quickly respond to signals it picks up in the marketplace to create products that people will wear. Fast fashion. Procter & Gamble, a company that does a great deal and has been for 200 years innovating around our needs in our houses for cleaning and washing and various other activities. Now, Procter & Gamble does a great deal of what we can call knowledge push innovation. It spends about $3 billion a year on people in laboratories around the world, essentially coming up with new knowledge which can be deployed in the various products they sell. But it has many more people and a great deal more money spent on market research, trying to understand user needs and use that information to pull through the products and services that they think that people will want. Another example of the same thing, this is a company called Churchill Potteries. It's actually quite an old company, originally founded about 300 years ago, but Churchill Potteries, as the name suggests, makes plates and cups and saucers and teapots, crockery. Now, that's not a field that necessarily is going to be revolutionized by new kinds of design for drinking implements. Much more of this is about doing what we do better. And a great deal of Churchill Potteries' work is understanding the specific needs of different kinds of users and incrementally improving what they can offer. Need-pull innovation. Now, these, of course, are market-driven innovations, but as we've said, we can also think about social needs. We've already looked at the Aravind eye system. Essentially, this is responding to a social need. The problem in the first case of people going blind because of cataracts in the eye. But the particular need that the Aravind system addresses is essentially how do we take that kind of care, giving people back their sight, to those groups who don't have the income to support purchasing a full operation in a modern hospital. So the Aravind system essentially changing the world for millions of people by meeting a social need. Or LifeStraw, again an example we've seen, meeting the tragic need that we still have in the world for clean drinking water. And through the invention and the innovation of a very simple filter-based straw, these boys are now able to suck up dirty water, and by the time they drink it, it's clean and safe. Need-pull innovation. So whether we're talking about commercial, market needs, or social needs, we can see that this is another really important class of sources of innovation. But once again, surely there are limits to need-pull innovation. Yes, you're right, once again. Basically, there are problems with need-pull innovation. In particular, if you think about it, you can listen to the voice of the customer, you can do market research, you can find out, but you eventually reach a limit. The question then comes, how might you lead the market? How can you take people beyond where they realize they could go? Now, this was very famously expressed by Henry Ford. He said, he's quoted as saying, "If I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have told me faster horses." Because people couldn't yet imagine the world of the horseless carriage. So sometimes it's important to take things, back to push innovation, beyond what people can express. And that's very much something that Steve Jobs believed in. The founder of Apple essentially is very, very famous for saying how important it is to lead the market. Basically saying, people don't know they want this thing, but when they've got it in their hand, they'll wonder how on earth they lived without it. And whether he was talking about the personal computer living in our lives, or these days the smartphone, essentially he's talking about moving beyond pull innovation to push. So let's try and summarize where we've been in this film. Basically, we started with the question, where do innovations come from? And the answer is from everywhere, from many, many different sources. We can classify these sources approximately into two classes. Those that are concerned with knowledge push, where new knowledge creates new opportunities, and demand or need pull, where essentially that need, that problem, pulls a solution together. But both knowledge push and need pull innovation have limitations. And so what we're really interested in is very often these two work together, as we've seen many different examples where we need a mixture of knowledge push and need pull. And it's perhaps a little bit like the blades of a pair of scissors. We can cut with one blade, but it works really well as a tool if the two are working together. Need pull and knowledge push innovation.